It is day 5 of my seasonal 7 series, where I post 7 videos in 7 days leading up to and themed around the winter solstice. Today, we're going to talk about shadow work. You guys know I love shadow work. I talk about it all the time. We're going to do some journal prompts and a little chit chat, okay? Let's get into it. Before I actually get into the prompts, I would like to encourage you, if you have not already, to check out my seasonal alignment video. It was the first video in this series. I talk a lot about the winter and what its energy is, and I'll talk a lot about shadow work because there is no season better suited for shadow work than winter. So I actually begin my journal on the solstice. I get a new journal every year, and I start that journal on the winter solstice. I don't wait until January 1st because the Gregorian calendar is a fucking lie that has been told to you so that you are out of tune with the natural rhythm of the world. Okay, January 30 or December 31st, January 1st doesn't fucking mean anything. It's a stupid calendar date that doesn't make sense. Calendars should be based on astrological movements. Anyways, so I don't care if my last journal is full. I start a new journal on the winter solstice, and that journal goes from winter solstice to winter solstice. I like to look at my life in chunks of cycles, which is why I'm such a strong advocate for seasonal alignment, and I like to have my journals operate year by year so I can kind of look at that. Now, that's going to bring us into journal prompt number 1, which is, what did you learn in this previous year? I find that that is the best opening journal entry. Because I run my journal for 1 year at a time, because it starts on the winter solstice, my first entry is, what did I learn last year? I don't necessarily pose the question, but that's always what I first start to write. Like, this year's been wild. Like, I start with that. And I would encourage you to do the same. Now, even if you don't want to start your journal on the solstice, or if you want to wait until your journal's full and start it whenever, that's fine. I would still encourage you for the winter, or for the winter solstice, throughout this season, to spend time reflecting on what you have learned in the previous year. That is your first prompt. Because winter is such a good season for reflecting, the next question I have for you is, what pattern repeated itself in your life? Look at the past year of your life and see what thing happened that has happened to you a million times. Like the same cyclical issue that you can't seem to get out of. Maybe you feel like it's a curse or whatever the thing is. Look at what pattern has repeated in your life in the previous year. I would then go on to ask a secondary question related to that, which is, where did that pattern come from? This is where we start to dive into the roots of our shadows and the roots of our issues. A lot of times we have patterns in our life and we feel like they're external, like this always happens to me. But in actuality, that happens because you bring it in. There's something within you that's vibrating at that. It's a cycle. It probably started when you were young. It could be anything. It could be your beliefs about money that cause you to constantly overdraw your bank account. It could be anything. I would encourage you to look at what pattern has repeated and try to find roots of where that could have begun. And then one more on that same question is, how can you break that pattern? This is not the kind of question that you're gonna just sit down and journal in like a day. This is the kind of question that you are gonna spend the entirety of the winter season really pondering and diving into, and I would encourage you to do so. This is one of those things that can actually transform your entire life, because whatever pattern you're in keeps you stuck in a certain cycle, and as soon as you break that pattern, you are off to a new direction in your life. Spend the winter really trying to go over that question. If you think you have the answer, double check in a few weeks. See if you feel differently about it. Especially if you're female. We have a natural rhythm in our body, which is what I've been learning a lot about in the last year, where with our hormones fluctuating with our menstrual cycle, you could answer that question very differently at different times in the month. So I would encourage you to answer it, go back in 2 weeks, try again. See how you feel. Now, because winter is the time of going within, it's a time of isolation, and it's a time of learning yourself and learning wisdoms, the next question I have for you is, are you comfortable alone? Or an alteration on that, or an additional question is, are you comfortable in silence? And what arises within you when you are alone or in silence? And or I should say, if you're alone, can you sit alone in silence? Are you uncomfortable alone in silence? Because if you are, that means you don't want to hear what's happening internally. And I would encourage you to then sit alone in silence and see what comes up and write that out. It could be anything that arises, but I promise you that what arises is something that needs to be handled. There's a shadow that will always surface if you just sit quiet long enough. The next question, because we are looking forward to planting new seeds in the spring, we're hoping to cultivate change within us throughout the winter so we can plant new seeds in the spring. So the question I have for you then is, if money were not an obstacle and you had nothing that you had to do, what would you do with your life? That should be the direction that you go for your life. Like, that should be what you would love to do with your life is what you should begin cultivating in your life. So first, spend some time to figure out what that is. If you take everything else away, you don't have to go to that 9 to 5. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. If there was no responsibilities in your life, what would you spend your time doing? What makes you happy? What lights you up? Similarly, kind of to that question is, if there were no societal judgments, if you didn't have to be concerned about what anybody else thought of you, what would you do differently in your life? Oftentimes, if it's not our 9 to 5 job or whatever keeping us from doing things we love, it is what we think would be perceived as. Starting a YouTube channel like this, that just doing what I'm doing, is, for a lot of people, myself included, real difficult. Because you have to start with, like, I'm gonna make videos, and when I start, no one's gonna watch them. But I'm gonna have to publicly just do that. I'm gonna have to publicly record myself saying a bunch of shit, put it on the internet, and then people are gonna know that I'm doing that, and they can watch it. And that's weird. Okay? But if I wasn't concerned with those judgments, it wouldn't be nearly as difficult. Do you see what I'm saying? So if there were, and not just work either, like, what in your life would you do differently? What thing would you change if there were no judgments? If you didn't have to be concerned about that, what would you do differently? Because that is your authentic expression, and you should start to work on uncovering that. I have one more prompt for you, and this should be an ongoing thing throughout all of winter, in my opinion. You should look at what offends you. So the question is, what offends me, and why does it offend me? This is something that should be ongoing. I mean, all the time, but at minimum throughout the winter. And it can be all day, every day. If you're out of the grocery store and somebody just says something that pisses you off, put a note in your phone. Like, get your phone out, make a note, or text yourself, right? What happened? And then later journal that out. Why did that bother you? Dig into that. Because oftentimes the things that upset us, the things that offend us, the things that bother us are pointing to something within us that requires healing. So I would encourage you to spend time looking at what bothers you, what offends you, and why. And I hate to be extra offensive, but this isn't always the case. It isn't always the case. But oftentimes, if somebody says something about you and you're mad about it, it's probably because part of you thinks it's true. It either is true or you think it's true. See what I'm saying? So it's about knowing who you are with such sovereignty. It's about knowing who you are with such confidence and conviction that other people couldn't offend you with their opinion because you know it's not true. If you don't know it's not true, it's offensive. Do you see what I'm saying? So there you have 6 to 10 prompts, depending on how you break down those sub-questions, that I think could keep you busy all winter long. Don't forget to tag me on social media, comment, like, subscribe, etc. And I will see you in the next video, which will be tomorrow.